What do you think of Michael Phelps?
Man, who knew that guy had so much personality? I mean, you see him on TV, he's laser focused. People are doing antics around him, trying to distract him, but he has a good sense of humor.
He has lightened up in the last few. Remember the picture they showed of him? They call that the curtain of distraction at ASU. Did you see that video? Have you seen the video?
That video has traveled around the world so many times. It was hilarious.
It was hilarious.
Something else.
And Derek Hall from the Diamondbacks, who knew he had a sense of humor?
No, I did know that.
I didn't. He was great.
He's good. I mean, what a role. He's a natural MC.
So before we get into the serious business of the election and what's going on, let me get your impression about events like the Open and things here in Arizona. You're how many generations is your family in Arizona?
5.
So you've watched the state literally grow up. In your whole life, you've seen this valley grow. What do you think about events like the Waste Management Open? And
that one is unbelievable. We have an event there. My campaign does every year. And this is our 4th year, I believe, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And people love to come here and watch that event. A lot of them don't know that golf is being, played there, but
their backs to the green at all times. But
it is incredible to be there. I was there on Saturday when they broke the record, over 200,000 spectators. But that's just one of the events here in the Valley that's just getting bigger and bigger. And I mean, the fact that people like Michael Phelps choose to live here,
right?
Says how much the Valley has grown and how well we're doing.
Literally a world-class athlete could live anywhere in the world and be loved and be treated like a celebrity, and yet he's chosen Phoenix,
That's
Arizona.
Right. That says a lot for the Valley.
It sure does. Let's talk about the election. We had Senator McCain in studio last week, or maybe earlier this week, and we talked about the transition.
Right.
Your opinions on how President-elect Trump has handled the transition, disagreements aside beforehand.
Right.
How do you feel about the transition?
I tell you, the cabinet picks so far, I think have been good. We've got them all except for agriculture and veterans, I believe. And I've been pleased. The ones that we'll deal with, Tillerson on my committee, Foreign Relations for Secretary of State, that's a big one. I don't know much about him other than those who have worked with him, like Condi Rice and James Baker, Bob Gates, like him and have recommended him. That carries some weight. And we'll have the hearings. I know there's some concern that ExxonMobil has done business in Russia. Russia is an oil and gas economy. As John McCain calls it, it's a gas station masquerading as a country.
Yeah.
And So you would expect ExxonMobil to do business, but they have honored the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, but that's why we have hearings, and those will be fulsome hearings.
When you look at how he's, I thought from the moment his victory speech kind of set the tone, and I said if he continues that tone, this is going to make peace for a lot of people. And do you think he's done a pretty good job of building some bridges with people within the party?
I do. I mean, some of the people that he's pulled in, I met 2 weeks ago with Nikki Haley. And Nikki Haley was highly critical of Donald Trump during the campaign, but he brought her on as UN ambassador. Many of the people he's brought on, had differences with him during the campaign. And I tweeted out right after, the night of the election, after I heard his speech, good speech. Congratulations on the big win. Now back to eating crow.
Yeah.
So for a lot of us who didn't think it was possible, he made it possible. And for me, I look for the good and assume the best and move ahead.
Have you had a conversation with him yet?
Not with him, but I'm close to Mike Pence and Reince Priebus and others, and we're moving ahead. And I'll obviously help on those nominees. In particular, we want the president to start with a full slate of his cabinet as quickly as possible. And I want this administration to succeed. I can tell you one thing. I think most of us, let's be real, were surprised the next morning. But the thing that started sinking in that night was, wow, what can we do with regard to regulation? I mean, with 8 years of President Obama and executive order after executive order, or the rulemaking that's gone on in these agencies that have made business so difficult to conduct. Taxes are one thing, regulations, that's what has really driven this economy down. And a lot of that can be done by the administration without the help of Congress, just, negating some of these executive orders. But through Congressional Review Act and passing legislation, we can really turn back a lot of these damaging regulations, and Obamacare, of course, as well.
We've talked a lot about about taxation, and that was what people noticed the most. But I think if you ask most business owners, you get to choose. Would you have lower taxes or less regulation? It would be a difficult choice for a lot of business owners because that regulation and compliance is so costly and makes it so
you are exactly right.
difficult.
With taxes, obviously high taxes are a problem. They want certainty and they want stability on that side, and on the regulatory environment, they want stability and certainty as well, and they've had nothing but new regulations piled on old regulations, and things like, with the EPA, with ozone regulations that are just completely and utterly unachievable. And then as soon as businesses make investments to try to meet an old standard, they move the goalposts again. And things like that are very damaging to business.
I heard, I think it was Mitch McConnell that was leery. He talked about the tax cuts, thought it was a great idea, but it needed to be revenue neutral. What needs to happen in a budget process where these tax cuts to corporations can happen, but at the same time, we're not going to drive ourselves into debt? Is that possible?
It is possible. Obviously, we're going to have to see where we go. I mean, how many brackets you can have. Can we go all the way to 3? The corporate tax rate is something we've got to move on very quickly because we've got to be competitive nationally. I'm still a bit troubled by some of the rhetoric during the campaign with regard to trade. We've got to trade. We're only 5% of the world's population, 20% of the world's economic output. If we don't trade, we don't grow. And so we'll need to do that with either bilateral or multilateral trade deals moving ahead. But I think that can be done. And I think that the president seems willing to listen to advice on that. And in a lot of areas, I think his instincts will be better than the advice that he gets. So we will see.
All right, so I want to take a quick break. After we get back, I want to ask you a little bit, some more specific things about the Obamacare, how that's going to happen now with the close Democrats. You have a majority in the Senate, but it's a little closer. Right. Can you get the Democrats over, enough Democrats over in the places where it's necessary to make some of these changes that are necessary? Are we going to get a budget? Are we going to get Obamacare overturned? And is the Senate going to be the key to all of that? So we'll do that here in just a moment. Senator Flake joins us for this half hour of the broadcast. So we will be back here in just a few moments with Senator Flake. In 60 seconds, we will get you another look at traffic. This is Mike Broomhead. All right, we are joined in studio by Senator Jeff Flake, and we went to break. I wanted to ask you about the possibilities. But before I get to anything else serious, I said this to Senator McCain, and I'll get your reaction. 2 words, Harry Reid.
He had this celebratory exit last week. With
I was hoping he was leaving that day.
Portraits.
I was hoping he was.
And I try to look for the good. There are things I can appreciate about Harry Reid, but I can tell you there has been nobody who has damaged the institution of the Senate more than Harry Reid over the past several years. He has just, as a rule, tried to shut the place down to protect his members from tough votes. But in the process, he has done, I think, lasting damage to the Senate as an institution, and that's unfortunate.
He, when the Senate flipped from Democratic control to Republican control, he came out and said, "This just shows the American people want us to work together." And I thought, where did you get that message from? I don't think that's the message they were sending at all.
They lost that election and got out of the majority largely because he, like I said, he tried to shield his members from tough votes. But people like Mark Begich in Alaska, he'd been in the Senate 6 years, in the majority the whole time, and had never had one of his amendments voted on the Senate floor, in the world's most deliberative body. But that's what happened when Harry Reid just shut the place down. And that, they lost the majority because of that. Those members running for re-election couldn't say, "Hey, here's what I went to Washington to do, and I did it." They just had to say, we're not doing anything.
When you look at the potential of a Trump administration with the Republican-held controlled Congress, how can Obamacare be repealed and replaced? Is the Senate going to be able to? Because I know not everything has to have the 60 votes, right. But are there things that you can do where you do need those 60 votes to get enough Democrats on your side?
Yes, if you look, there are 10 during the next election. I was elected in 12. I'm up again in 2018. There were only 3 Republicans in open seats who won in 12. It was a very bad year for us, and that means 6 years later, Democrats have a lot of seats to defend. Of the 33 seats up, or 34 actually, 25 will be defended by Democrats. 10 of those seats in states that were won by Obama. And so people like Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, Joe Donnelly of Indiana, they're going to be looking over their shoulder really hard. Joe Manchin of West Virginia, and I think we can pick up 60 votes on a number of these issues that we need to work through on, things like tax policy and regulatory reform especially. And so we can cobble together 60 on some things. Sometimes it'll be difficult, and there will be some that we won't be able to. And there will be calls, I can tell you, from some people to get rid of the filibuster completely.
Right.
I can tell you, we might do that on the Supreme Court. That's part of the president's executive calendar that was never filibustered prior to 2003. So we would just be doing de facto or de jure what was de facto prior to 2003. Right. That's not a big deal. But in terms of legislation, to get rid of the filibuster would be devastating, I think, to conservatives and to the conservative agenda. Because once Democrats would gain control again, and they will at some point, right-to-work laws will be gone all over the country. We'll have a national minimum wage law that's increased substantially. Having the filibuster for legislation protects limited government more than it harms it. And I'm worried that people will say, get rid of it.
And see, I think that that's a wise way to look at things, because I've said to my friends that are liberal, that were Obama supporters, you're happy about the executive orders because you're looking at it in a results-oriented way instead of a procedural way. Right. What happens when a guy like a Donald Trump gets elected president? What if Donald Trump now says, guess what? I've got a cell phone and a pen myself, and now it's time for me to take the lead and just continue what the past president did. Right. I'm going to cut Congress out where I can and just by executive order run things. They are going to lose their minds, and that's what happens when you look at things in a results way as opposed to a procedural way.
Well, the Democrats, if they could take back Obamacare, believe me, they would. Look back at 2008 when they came in. For a brief window, they had 60 votes in the Senate. That's when they pushed through Obamacare. They used reconciliation for one of the little sidecar things, but the bulk of Obamacare, it was when they had 60 votes before Ted Kennedy passed away. Since then, they've lost 63 votes in the House over a series of elections. They've lost the Senate. They've lost 12 seats in the Senate. That's what happens when a party says, all right, we've got all the levers and we're going to move through and not even consult the other side or not even try to do something in a bipartisan way. You don't have legislation that endures. And you end up with a situation where the pendulum swings back with a vengeance the other way. So there are some things that we can do with reconciliation, Obamacare, to actually get the repeal on the table. But let me tell you, it's going to be tougher to replace than some believe, and it's going to take a longer time. There are contracts out there that go for the next year. A lot of the bids will just go out in May of this year. It's going to be tougher to get rid of than people think. And tougher to replace. And so we'll get to work on that quickly, though.
Can you keep people covered and drive down costs? Because it's so costly. Arizona is suffering. You know, when you see so many, every county, it looks like in Arizona on average is paying more for health insurance now if you're in the exchanges than your mortgage.
Yes, we put that figure out. You guys,
it was your table.
It was great. And I can tell you, I hear that anecdotally all the time. I had a brother-in-law just the other day say that our health coverage is much more expensive than our mortgage. And in Arizona, we saw 116% increases in some counties, with some providers. The average was, huge premium increase, to say nothing of the co-pays and deductibles that people pay once they utilize the coverage. So, yes, it can be driven down. But to cover everybody's pre-existing condition, you've got to have some big risk pool. There are different ways to go about it. Any which way is probably better than the Obamacare way, but you can't have coverage for everyone without either having some kind of big risk pool that we pay through higher taxes or mandatory coverage in some way. So you can't have it all without paying for it, is what I'm trying to say. And we're trying to find the way to control costs. And we all know on the Republican side that you do that by choice and accountability, and by having people pay as much as possible the first dollar coverage out of their own pocket rather than third-party coverage. That's what drives up costs considerably.
All right, we do this goofy thing at the bottom.